The fever broke, but the unease clung to Mr. Lao like a second skin. He returned the keys. He prayed at the temple. He told himself the ordeal was over. Yet the apartment had already taken root inside him. It was not a place one could simply walk away from. That night, the dreams came again, but this dream was different. It did not begin with footsteps or flickering lights. It did not begin with grotesque laughter or twisting heads. Instead, he was seated calmly in the living room. The air was heavy, but still. And across from him, on the sofa, sat the woman in the brown pajamas. Her posture was quiet, her hands folded neatly in her lap. For the first time, she was not smiling. For the first time, her face did not warp into something monstrous. Instead, she looked tired, sorrowful even. Her voice was soft, barely more than a breath. Please, tell my story. Because the one who cheated wasn't me. The words struck like ice. Mr. Lao remembered the husband's tale, the story of betrayal, of savings stolen, of a wife driven to despair. But what if it was a lie? What if the truth had been twisted, her voice silenced in death, her memory smeared so that he might live without guilt? In Chinese belief, spirits with grievances are the most dangerous of all. A soul unjustly accused cannot rest. It lingers, bound by bitterness, replaying its suffering again and again. And now, it seemed, this woman had found her witness. Her eyes glistened, not with rage but with sorrow. They think it was me, she whispered, but it wasn't. I was the one betrayed. The room darkened around them, shadows thickening in the corners. But unlike before, she did not rise, did not twist, did not bare her teeth. She only sat, waiting. For the first time, Mr. Lao felt not terror, but pity. The woman who had haunted his dreams, who had appeared in the nightmares of strangers, who had terrified a child into fleeing her new home. Perhaps she was not a monster at all. Perhaps she was only a soul crying out for truth. When he woke, her face remained with him. Not grotesque, not twisted, just sad, just lonely. It was the last dream he ever had of her. Days passed, life resumed. He returned to his other listings, other clients, other homes. Yet the shadow of the brown pajamaed woman never fully left him. He never asked what became of the apartment. He never inquired whether it was sold, or if another family dared to live there. To him, the story was closed, sealed behind a door he would never open again. And yet, late at night when the world was quiet, he would sometimes wonder, did she finally find peace, having spoken her truth at last? Or did she linger still, bound to those spotless walls, waiting for another tenant, another dream, another chance to be heard? He did not want to know, because some answers, he realized, were more dangerous than silence. In the wake of the final dream, Mr. Lao chose silence. He never spoke of the apartment again except in hushed tones, never revisited the building, never wondered aloud about its fate. But the story, once told, lingers far beyond its walls. In Asia, hungs, stigmatized properties, carry a weight heavier than bricks and mortar. It is not merely the stain of a death within the walls, but the cultural taboo that grows around it. Even one death can be enough to strip a home of its value. Buyers avoid them, renters fear them, and owners struggle to free themselves of the burden. The reasoning runs deeper than superstition. It is about energy. In Chinese folk belief, a house is not only a structure of wood and concrete. It is a container of life force. Birth, marriage, joy, and prosperity strengthen its chi. But tragedy, especially violent or lonely death, poisons it. The chi becomes heavy, stagnant, warped. To live inside such a place is to risk carrying that weight yourself. In Taiwan and Hong Kong, property values of Hungs often fall 30 to 50%. Realtors must disclose deaths if asked directly, though many try to avoid the question. Some attempt to cleanse the space, inviting Taoist priests, burning incense, performing rituals to drive out lingering spirits. But sometimes, as in this case, the rituals bring not peace, but warnings. The death incense, the 2 long, 1 short burn, was a red flag no one should have ignored. The case of the woman in brown pajamas raises a deeper, more unsettling question. What if the true danger was not the property itself, but the injustice buried within it? In life, her reputation may have been ruined. In death, her silence twisted into wrath. In this way, the apartment became not just a place of tragedy, but a stage for a spirit replaying its own story, over and over, dragging others into its narrative. The little girl's vision of the long tongue was not fantasy. In Chinese ghost lore, victims of hanging often appear with swollen faces, protruding tongues, and twisted necks. Children are thought to see more clearly into the other side, their innocence unclouded by disbelief. To her, the truth revealed itself plainly. A woman bound to the ceiling, descending with her death mask intact. The repeated deaths inside the unit echo another belief. Spirits with grievances seek company. They lure the vulnerable, replaying their trauma in a cycle that mirrors the original act. The first tenant hanged herself in the exact same spot as the wife. The second chose the bathroom, but the method remained identical. Coincidence or compulsion? In folklore, such repetition is the mark of a soul that cannot move on. What remains most chilling is the woman's final words. The one who cheated wasn't me. If true, the husband's story was a lie, a shifting of blame. Perhaps he had betrayed her, not the other way around. Perhaps her grief had been compounded by humiliation and falsehood. If so, then her haunting was not vengeance, but protest, a cry for the truth to be known. For Mr. Lao, this realization reshaped everything. He had not merely witnessed a haunted home. He had glimpsed a tragedy distorted by human deceit, and in doing so, he had brushed against the raw wound of a soul still bleeding. It is easy to dismiss such tales as folklore, to say the mind invents horrors when primed by fear. But those who have stood in such places, who have felt the inexplicable weight of sorrow pressing on their chests, know better. Even without a single sound, even without a flicker of movement, some spaces declare themselves cursed. And in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in all places where the dead are remembered as fiercely as the living, such properties do not easily fade into normalcy. They remain marked, avoided, whispered about long after the walls are repainted and the floors polished. Because paint cannot cover grief, tiles cannot bury injustice, and the woman in the brown pajamas, whether she rests now or not, remains a reminder that some homes belong not to the living, but to the stories of the dead. For weeks afterward, Mr. Lao avoided even driving past that community. He had handled countless properties in his career, mansions, condos, crumbling flats, but never one that haunted him long after he had returned the keys. Most realtors, at the end of the day, simply move on to the next listing. But this time was different. This time he had taken something with him. A story he could not forget. A voice that demanded to be heard. The woman in the brown pajamas. She had appeared in his dreams, in the dreams of potential buyers, and even in the eyes of a child who should never have known such horror. She had revealed herself not merely as a ghost, but as a soul caught in injustice, condemned to repeat her sorrow until someone acknowledged her truth. And in a strange way, she had chosen him as her messenger. For all his years in real estate, he had thought he understood the nature of stigmatized properties. They were tainted homes, avoided out of cultural taboo, priced low enough to attract only the most desperate. He believed the stigma came from perception alone, that the mind, once poisoned with the knowledge of death, created its own haunting. But now he wasn't so sure, because he had felt her presence. He had seen her feet on the recording. He had heard the slam of the bathroom door when no draft could explain it. He had smelled the heavy air, suffocating despite the open balcony. And he had dreamed the same dream as strangers who had never met him. That was not imagination. That was something else. Even so, he never reported the truth to management. He never warned the next realtor who might inherit the listing. In his line of work, silence was often easier than truth. But in silence, the haunting grew louder. Perhaps that was the woman's final lesson, that stories denied in life will demand to be told in death. Tonight you've heard her story. You've walked the halls of that apartment. You've stood beneath the place where the chandelier once hung. You've seen how grief and lies can linger, binding not only the soul of the dead, but also the lives of those who follow. So what do you think? Was the apartment cursed? Or was it the truth of a woman's betrayal that bound her spirit to those spotless walls? Was it bad luck, cultural superstition, or a genuine cry from the other side? In the end, perhaps the answer doesn't matter, because one truth shines through. Homes remember. Walls carry echoes, and sometimes those echoes are louder than the living can bear. If you ever step into a place that feels wrong, a place where silence presses against your chest, where shadows seem to cling too long, ask yourself this: are you truly alone? Or are you standing in someone else's unfinished story? Because in the stillness of the night, when the world is asleep, those who were wronged in life may still be waiting for their story to be told, waiting for someone to listen. And sometimes, all it takes is a pair of brown pajamas to remind you. The dead do not always rest. Welcome back to Hong Kong Horror. Tonight I have a story that stretches far beyond superstition, deep into the shadows of grief, betrayal, and the restless dead. Many of you have asked about hungs, stigmatized properties, places tainted by death. In Asia, these homes are feared not only because of the tragedies within their walls, but because they are believed to hold echoes of the past, echoes that refuse to fade. This tale comes from Taiwan, shared by a veteran realtor who thought he had seen it all. But this particular apartment was unlike any he had ever handled before. It wasn't just another stigmatized property. It was a place where tragedy didn't stop at one life, or even two. It was a place where the dead seemed to wait for the living, ready to pull them into the same fate. The man who told this story is known as Mr. Lao. For decades he had worked in the real estate industry, guiding countless clients to homes across different cities in Taiwan. He knew the market, the culture, and the shadows that hung over certain properties. He had dealt with apartments that had been the scene of suicides, accidents, or even crimes. These were the so-called hungs. In Taiwan and across much of Chinese-speaking Asia, people are deeply cautious about buying or renting such places. A single death is enough to drive away potential tenants. A violent death, such as suicide or murder, stains a property with a stigma that often lowers its value by 30 to 50%. Buyers know this, and sellers dread it. Realtors, however, learn to work with it. They learn to soften the truth, to redirect focus, to hope the right client doesn't ask the wrong questions. For Mr. Lao, a hung was just another property, until one phone call changed everything. It was an ordinary morning when his cell phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. On the other end was a man's voice, low and weary but steady. "I saw your listing in the papers," the caller said. "Do you handle properties in such and such community?" "Yes," replied Mr. Lao, recognizing the area. "I know it well. I have a flat there," the man continued. "I want to rent it out or sell it. Either way is fine, whatever is faster." It sounded like business falling directly into his lap. a realtor's lucky day. Without hesitation, Mr. Lawo began asking the routine questions. What's the layout of the unit? How many rooms? Is anyone currently living there? There was a pause. Then the man replied, It's on the 4th floor. 3 bedrooms, 1 living room. It's vacant. The 4th floor. In Cantonese, the number 4 is pronounced sei, which sounds nearly identical to the word for death. Many people avoided 4th floor units altogether. Yet others believed it wasn't always a curse. Some saw it as neutral, even as smooth passage in certain dialect interpretations. For Mr. Lawo, this was just another detail. He made the appointment. When he arrived, the owner was waiting in the lobby. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a polo shirt and khaki pants, dressed like any working professional. But his face told another story. Deep shadows bruised his eyes, and his skin had the gray, sunken quality of someone who hadn't slept well in weeks, maybe months. They exchanged greetings and made their way upstairs. The man unlocked the door and gestured for Mr. Lawo to step inside. From the very first moment, something felt wrong. The air wasn't stale. The balcony door was open, and the rooms were well ventilated. The floors gleamed as if freshly scrubbed. There was no mildew, no damp smell, no trace of neglect. On the surface, the apartment was spotless, but the atmosphere was heavy, suffocating, as though the walls themselves exhaled sorrow. Still, Mr. Lawo did his job. He walked through the rooms, taking notes in his mind. Spacious living room, bedrooms tidy, kitchen functional. All seemed fine, until the owner suddenly spoke. "My wife," he said matter-of-factly, pointing at the ceiling in the living room. "She hanged herself, right here." The words froze in the air. For a moment, Mr. Lawo nearly dropped the glass of water he had just been handed. His professional mask held, but inside his stomach tightened. The owner's voice remained calm, almost detached, as though he had repeated the story so many times it had lost meaning. Yet the shadows under his eyes told another truth. And in that moment, Mr. Lawo realized this was not just another stigmatized property. This was the beginning of a story that would haunt him in ways he could never have imagined. The man's words hung in the air like a noose itself. His tone was so flat, so devoid of emotion, that it only deepened the chill that spread through Mr. Lawo's chest. He had heard plenty of confessions in his career. Stories of sudden heart attacks, of accidental deaths, of suicides whispered with shame, but never told in such a matter-of-fact way. They went downstairs to the lobby to continue their conversation. There, away from the suffocating atmosphere of the apartment, the owner finally unraveled the story of how his wife came to die in that living room. 3 years earlier, he had discovered a devastating truth. His wife had been unfaithful, but it wasn't just betrayal of the heart. The man she was seeing had swindled her out of her entire savings before vanishing into the shadows. The discovery ignited a storm of rage. The owner, unwilling to forgive, took their child and returned to live with his parents. He cut all ties with her. Silence, abandonment. Alone, disgraced, and drowning in despair, his wife chose the rope. She fastened it to the chandelier in the living room and hanged herself there. For nearly 2 weeks, her body went undiscovered. It was only when neighbors began complaining of a foul, rotting stench seeping into the hallways that the truth was uncovered. Police entered and found her lifeless form, suspended in the very spot where light once spilled from crystal glass. After her death, the apartment was left empty. But no property in a city stays vacant forever. Time passed, memories blurred, and eventually a new tenant appeared. A young woman, a healthcare worker, with the energy of someone just starting her adult life. For a time, she brought warmth back into the unit. The apartment lights glowed at night. The balcony held potted plants. Laughter returned to the halls. But not for long. 3 months later, she too was found dead. The manner of her passing was eerily familiar. A rope, the chandelier, the same exact spot where the wife had hanged herself. Her grieving family, stricken by both tragedy and fear, sought help from a Taoist priest. Rituals were performed inside the apartment to cleanse the energy. Incense sticks were lit, their smoke curling into the air. But something went wrong. The candle flame split into two. The incense burned into the dreaded pattern known as two long, one short. In Taoist tradition, this is a death omen, a direct summoning of spirits. The priest's face turned grim. He warned the family. Another death would soon follow, and within half a year, there would be blood. The owner dismissed it, clinging to reason. Superstition, he told himself. Rituals and omens couldn't dictate reality. He even removed the chandelier, believing the problem was the object itself. If the source of tragedy was gone, perhaps peace would return. But he was wrong. The next tenant was another young woman. She lasted even less time. One night she took her life in the bathroom, hanging herself from a pipe. Different location. Same end. By then, it was undeniable. Something malignant clung to the apartment, like rot beneath polished wood. The owner stopped renting it out. Instead, he tried to reclaim it for himself. He moved back in, hoping that by inhabiting the space, he could break the cycle. But what awaited him was worse than emptiness. At night, footsteps echoed through the halls, though no one was there. Laughter, faint crying, and whispers slipped through the walls, sometimes brushing against his ear. Sleep became impossible. Then came the thoughts. Dark thoughts. Thoughts of ending his own life. They burrowed into his mind, growing louder each night. One evening, when he failed to show up for a family dinner, his parents rushed over. Inside, they found him collapsed in the living room, barely conscious from an overdose of sleeping pills. By sheer luck, they had arrived in time. He survived. But his eyes, when he told this to Mr. Lau, reflected the truth. He had already crossed the edge. Now he pushed the keys into Mr. Lau's hand and said quietly, "If you want this property, it's yours. Sell it, rent it, do whatever you wish. I just want it off my hands." It was an offer laced with desperation and a warning. For a long time after hearing the man's confession, Mr. Lao sat in silence. His professional instincts told him to walk away. Too many deaths, too much grief. Any realtor knew that once an apartment became a hung, its value was gutted. Few dared step inside, and fewer still would ever sign a lease. Yet another part of him whispered, opportunity. The location was excellent. The building itself was well maintained. And in his career, he had handled stigmatized properties before. He had learned that with the right words, the right price, and the right buyer, even the darkest homes could be moved. Fear, after all, was negotiable. Business was business. So he accepted the keys. The next morning, he returned. But this time, he came prepared. Around his neck, he wore a protective amulet, a talisman blessed in a local temple. Standing outside the apartment door, he paused. Then he did something he rarely did in his line of work. He knocked lightly, bowed his head, and spoke into the silence. "I'm sorry for disturbing. Please forgive me." The words felt strange in his mouth, but necessary. As if respect might shield him from whatever unseen weight lingered beyond the threshold. Inside, he turned on every light. The rooms filled with artificial brightness, chasing away the shadows that pooled in the corners. He began his routine. First, a full walkthrough with his phone in hand, recording video as he narrated the details. Spacious living room, 3 bedrooms, polished floors, balcony with decent ventilation. On camera, everything appeared normal. Then he set up his tripod at the entrance, positioning his phone for a professional shoot. He always liked to film a presentation, an introduction to the property, a slow walkthrough, and then still photographs for the listing. Potential clients appreciated the thoroughness. It was one of the ways he had built his reputation. The phone's red light blinked as recording began. He stepped into the living room, pulling open the curtains so that sunlight spilled across the floor. That's when it happened. The tripod collapsed. Not a slip, not a wobble. It crashed to the ground with sudden force. His first thought was his phone. Brand new, expensive. He rushed to the entrance, heart pounding, and scooped it up. To his relief, it was still recording. He let out a shaky laugh. But then his mind turned over the oddness. The tripod was sturdy, designed to stand firm even in wind. There was no draft, no vibration, no reason at all for it to topple. It had been steady one moment, then flat on the floor the next. He brushed it off. Accidents happen. He finished filming the walkthrough, packed up, and left. It wasn't until later, in the safety of his office, that he saw it. Reviewing the footage, he watched the moment the tripod fell. The phone had continued recording, the lens now angled low, catching only his legs as he rushed to pick it up. But behind him, just at the edge of the frame, there was something else. A pair of pale white feet, bare, motionless, planted firmly on the floor just a step behind him. His breath caught in his throat. He replayed the clip again and again. Each time, the feet were there. They did not belong to him. They did not belong to anyone he could see. His mind flashed to an old saying. Never keep such videos. They bring bad luck. Hands trembling, he deleted the recording. He uploaded only the still photos and the initial clean walkthrough video, carefully captioned with vague words. Good lighting, good ventilation, suitable for quiet tenants. That night, sleep brought no peace. In his dream, the video replayed itself. But this time, it changed. Instead of just the pale feet, the camera panned upward, slowly revealing the legs, the torso, and then the face. A woman in brown pajamas, her expression twisted into a smile too wide, too unnatural. She stood directly behind him, staring at the lens as if she knew he was watching. Mr. Lao woke with a jolt, drenched in cold sweat, his heart racing. For the first time in his career, a property had entered his dreams, and he sensed, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The nightmare still clung to Mr. Lao the next morning. He woke with the image of the woman in brown pajamas burned into his mind. But real estate waits for no one. Fear or no fear, he had a job to do. At 7 o'clock sharp, his phone rang. On the line was a man who had seen the new listing online. He and his girlfriend wanted to schedule a viewing. The speed of the inquiry almost felt like fate. Mr. Lao hesitated, recalling his dream, but forced himself to agree. By 9, the couple arrived at the lobby. They looked like every realtor's dream clients. Early 30s, well-dressed, the air of young professionals ready to start the next chapter of their lives. The man was confident, smiling easily. The woman, quieter, watched everything with careful eyes. After introductions, Mr. Lao led them upstairs. Inside the apartment, the man was immediately impressed. "The layout is great," he said as he walked through the bedrooms, already picturing furniture and life in the space. The price was almost too good to be true, and he knew it. But as they entered the living room, the woman froze. Her expression drained of warmth, her lips pressing into a thin line. She looked around as though something unseen pressed against her skin. After a moment, she turned sharply toward her partner. "We need to leave," she said, her voice tight. Surprised, he protested, but she insisted. They left quickly, the atmosphere tense. Outside the unit, she leaned closer to Mr. Lao and whispered the question he dreaded. "Did someone die here?" His instinct was to deflect, to soften the truth. But something in her eyes, sharp, demanding, already certain, pushed him toward honesty. He nodded, admitting that yes, deaths had occurred here. Her face paled. She thanked him and walked away with her boyfriend. That evening, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from the man. "Good morning, Mr. Lauo. My girlfriend had a dream last night. She dreamt of a woman in brown pajamas sitting in the living room. The woman told her, 'This place isn't right for you. Do not buy it. We've decided not to proceed. Thank you for your time.'" Mr. Lauo stared at the text, his hands trembling. The brown pajamas. The same figure from his own dream. This was no coincidence. The spirit wasn't just haunting him. She was reaching into the minds of anyone who dared to enter. But business carried on, and soon another potential client appeared. A single mother with her young daughter. She seemed practical, grounded, the kind of tenant who brushed aside superstition. Her daughter, a bright little girl no older than 7, ran eagerly through the rooms. She darted into bedrooms, peeked into closets, and finally bounded onto the balcony. Standing there, she giggled. "Mommy, the wind is so strong here," she shouted. But the day was stifling hot. The air outside was perfectly still. There wasn't even the faintest breeze. The mother didn't notice. She liked the apartment, especially the low rent. When Mr. Lauo gently warned her about the unit's history, she waved it off. "I pray often," she said. "I have nothing to fear. Ghosts don't trouble me." She signed the lease on the spot. For the first time in his career, Mr. Lauo didn't feel relief at closing a deal. He felt dread. His dread proved right. Within a week, the mother called him in panic. Her voice shook as she spoke. "My daughter says something comes to her at night. A woman. She climbs down from the ceiling with a very long tongue." Mr. Lauo nearly dropped his coffee. The image was unmistakable. In death by hanging, the tongue often protrudes grotesquely. The child had seen what adults could not, the spirit's true form. The mother begged to end the lease immediately. She didn't care about losing her deposit. She and her daughter fled that very day. For the second time, the apartment had been rejected, not just by logic, not just by fear, but by something far more primal, the intrusion of the dead into the world of the living. And for Mr. Lauo, one truth became impossible to deny. This wasn't just a stigmatized property. It was a trap. The mother and daughter left the unit in haste, their departure leaving behind a silence heavier than before. For Mr. Lauo, it felt as if every client who touched this apartment carried away a piece of its shadow. Yet each time the shadow seemed to grow larger, looming closer to him. That night, his sleep was fractured, and once again, he dreamed. He was back at the apartment, though he had not chosen to be there. The keys weighed heavy in his hand, cold metal pressing into his palm. The door before him opened without his touch, groaning as if reluctant to reveal its secrets. Inside, the lights flickered on one by one, guiding him deeper into the darkness. From the kitchen, she emerged. The woman in the brown pajamas moved slowly, her steps deliberate, as though she had all the time in the world. She crossed into the living room, the very place where the chandelier once hung. She stood with her back to him, her voice a whisper that coiled through the air like smoke. "Do you want to stay?" Then her head began to turn. At first, just slightly, then further and further still, until her face rotated a full 180 degrees, her neck twisted, her eyes locking with his in defiance of nature. Her mouth stretched into that grotesque, unnatural smile he had seen before. He woke, screaming. Sweat poured down his face, his sheets clinging to him. The clock read 4 a.m., the hour of spirits, when the veil between life and death is said to be thinnest. The next morning, Mr. Lao sat at his desk, trembling, staring at his computer screen. His heart knew the truth long before his mind accepted it. This was no property he could sell. It was something else entirely. A place that didn't belong to the living. He took down the listing. For the first time in his career, he willingly gave up on a property. Profit no longer mattered. Reputation no longer mattered. Only survival did. Still, responsibility remained. He had the keys. He needed to return them to management. So he arranged to meet a colleague and close the matter once and for all. They arrived at the building together, but when they reached the apartment door, his colleague refused to step inside. "You told me what happened here," the man said, his voice firm. "You go in. I won't." So Mr. Lao entered alone. The rooms greeted him with the same suffocating heaviness. He moved mechanically, checking each window, pulling each curtain, ensuring everything was secure. His steps echoed, but no matter how fast he walked, he could not shake the feeling that someone, or something, followed just behind. When he was done, he stood in the living room one final time. Bowing his head, he spoke softly into the silence. "I'm sorry for disturbing you. I won't return again. Please forgive me." He turned toward the door, and then the bathroom door slammed shut. The sound was deafening, like a gunshot in the stillness. He froze, heart hammering. Every window was closed, every draft sealed. The slam could not be explained. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. He bolted. Down the hallway, down the stairs, bursting back into the daylight where his colleague waited with wide, alarmed eyes. That night, fever consumed him. He lay bedridden, drenched in sweat, his body racked with chills. It lasted 2 days. His mind whispered that something from the apartment had followed him home. Whether illness or curse, he couldn't be sure. When he recovered, his first act was to rush to a temple. There, before the incense and the statues of deities, he prayed for protection. He prayed that nothing had latched onto him, prayed that he could sever the invisible thread that tied him to that place. But deep down, he feared it was too late.